Hey everybody, good evening from Nichita, Thailand, and thanks for being on the line today. I'm Colonel Matt Levine. I am the director of WRAIR-AFRIMS. I'm super excited to be here and to share our AFRIMS GHE story with all of you. The overseas labs, I bet many of you have seen them, but for those who haven't, they are a little bit of a mystery. And so I'll just give you a basic background. AFRIMS is a R&D institute. We're headquartered in Bangkok, Thailand, and we're focused on infectious disease research. We've been here for 64 continuous years. We're located on a Royal Thai Army installation, and we have over 400 US and locally employed staff. That's a big number, and most of those folks are Thai. And while the bulk of our people are here in the Bangkok area, we also operate a number of field sites across Southeast Asia and Oceania. There's no military base here, no US military base, I should say, or SOFA agreement. Instead, we fall under the US ambassador, the chief of mission, it's called. And our military structure, really, this is the flattest organization I've been a part of in the DoD. A full 2/3 of our uniformed personnel are majors or above, and 1/3 are captains and down. The vast majority of our work is accomplished, no surprise, by local Thai nationals. Our US team, active duty team, we direct, but the Thai scientists and technicians are really what make the magic happen. They're incredible scientists, technicians, and admin folks, and we're just really fortunate to have them. While we're headquartered here in Bangkok, our footprint is actually a bit amorphous. So we tend to expand and contract based on A, where the diseases are at any given time. We're kind of like storm chasers in that respect. And B, where the host nations are willing to collaborate with us, which is also in flux due to ever-changing geopolitical landscapes. The science we do is highly specialized, and really our researchers, it takes a long time to be trained up in that field. It requires many years of not just experience, but also just of dedicated education. Most of them have like dual degrees and such. So that's a bit about who we are. Now I'll shift to what we're for. As many of you know, and I'll say next slide here. Let's see, please push me through. I think I didn't go through the disclaimer. Okay, so as many of you know, more troops have been lost in military history to disease than from the kinetic actions of enemy forces. And this outlines some of those numbers. If you want to see a real difference, look at the Spanish-American War there. In the late 18th and early 19th century, the US military was evolving into an expeditionary force. And the impact of diseases like yellow fever and typhoid fever led to the establishment of temporary medical labs to support our deployed forces. But after World War II, the DoD recognized the need for something more enduring. So we sought to establish permanent overseas research laboratories in countries that were both strategically stable and had a high burden of endemic infectious diseases. Next slide, please. In 1959, there was a major cholera outbreak in Thailand. And it was then that the Thai and US medical leaders proposed establishing a joint Thai-US medical research laboratory here in Bangkok. So that handshake you see in that picture, that's really our origin story. That's the moment in time that set us moving forward. It laid the foundation for more than 6 decades of uninterrupted partnership. Before agreeing to the lab, the King of Thailand, His Majesty Rama IX, there in a white suit, rightfully asked, "How will the research help my people?" And the answer is actually surprisingly straightforward. And that's that the vast majority of defense health is of great benefit to global health. So the same diseases that keep the Department of Defense up at night, things like scrub typhus, dengue, and AMR, are the exact same diseases that afflict everyday people here in Thailand, and for that matter, across the developing world. So for example, AFRIMS played a key role in developing every FDA-approved medication that prevents malaria. And we developed these drugs for the purpose of saving service members. But these products went on to save millions of global lives. Our defense health solution became a global health solution. And this is really a critical point, especially in today's environment. So more than ever, our GHA activities, we have to start, or we have to continue framing them correctly. And it's not about humanitarianism or foreign assistance. Military GHE is conducted to achieve strategic effects in support of national security and in support of the warfighter. Now, does GHG benefit global health? Yes, absolutely. We should all be proud of that. At AFRIMS, we're certainly proud of our accomplishments, but that's not the reason we do it. And as a community of practice, it's more important than ever that we learn how to effectively sell GHG, both to DoD leadership and to skeptical audiences. For better or worse, we need to be able to answer, what does America gain in a transactional sense? Or put differently, how does our work support the COCOM? When I first took this position, I struggled with that question. And we did a lot of work here at AFRIMS to enhance our value added to the COCOM and to enhance our messaging. First, we made it a point to deepen our understanding of the organizational structure above us. So as part of Indo-PACOM, we engaged the Indo-PACOM J07, USER-PAC, 18th TMC, TMC, PAC Fleet, and Pacific Partnership. And then we nested our activities and communicated our accomplishments within the COCOM's lines of efforts and priority. Next slide, please. So how is AFRIMS relevant to the COCOM? Well, to answer that, we have to consider the type of conflict we're preparing for. In LISCO, the lessons of military history will remain relevant. LISCO in the Indo-Pacific will likely require the deployment of hundreds of thousands of US service members out of CONUS and into Asia, Southeast Asia, and Oceania. The troops will operate in tropical jungles, island chains, dense urban environments, engaged in high intensity prolonged conflict, and history tells us that these deployed forces will be exposed to all kinds of infectious threats, from mosquitoes and tick-borne illnesses, re-emerging threats like avian flu, antimicrobial resistant wound infections, food and waterborne outbreaks, bloodborne infections, to include, this is a big deal for us, the risk of receiving HIV, contaminated blood during battlefield transfusions, sexually transmitted diseases, because like in Vietnam, we can expect a bunch of STIs, and these threats will be persistent. And day after day, exposure after exposure, they'll mount up and take their toll. And they're gonna consume precious medical resources and erode our readiness. And over time, essentially, they'll degrade combat power of our fighting force. And really, that's why AFRIMS matters. Our job at AFRIMS is to counter these threats by developing information products and medical countermeasures. By that, I mean actual products that can serve the fighting strength. And so the way AFRIMS supports the COCOM really depends on the time frame in question. And this is why I think in the beginning I had trouble answering that question, because it's a little bit two-part. So over the long term, like our core mission, we provide real-world products like vaccines, rapid diagnostic tests, therapeutics, and insect repellents. And we're able to do that because we have world-class capabilities. For those that have been here, we have insectaries, a world-class vivarium, we have human cohorts, we have incredible laboratories, incredible people. But the reality is that product development takes time. Developing a new drug takes years, if not decades. And the work we did 10 years ago is saving lives today. And the science we do today will save lives in 10 years from now. But when senior leaders ask me why we're relevant, they really don't want to hear that we hope to deliver a chikungunya vaccine by 2030. They want to know, what are we doing for them right now? And so what do we offer them, today? And that's twofold. We offer biosurveillance, which, we maintain an infectious disease biosurveillance network along with our partners that spans Indo-Pacific. And this network acts as a global early warning system, which helps us detect emerging threats. And then we use that information to help prepare US forces before they deploy. For example, we conduct biosurveillance during exercises like Cobra Gold and Balakatam. Secondly, and probably less obvious, but really it's a big deal, is that we form partnerships with all lines of people. And WRAIR-AFRIMS serves as a forward deployed instrument of US health diplomacy. We offer sustained, reliable, permanent presence in the region. We've built deep trust-based relationships that make us the partner of choice in this area and in this region. And that brings access and influence. So for example, next month, we'll bring the Armed Forces of the Philippine Surgeon General to Hawaii. And while there, we'll host key leader engagements with Indo-PACOM, 18th, TMC, PAC Fleet, and we'll attend LAMPAC. And the Filipinos, they have many interests, of course, for those who are reading the news. But in terms of military medicine, they're really interested in like clinical skills exchanges and IMET opportunities. Meanwhile, the U.S. side, Indo-PACOM, we're exploring, or they're exploring, the use of AFP medical facilities for convalescent care during LISCO. So in this sense, at AFRIMS, we consider ourselves a strategic enabler, actively facilitating collaborations that enhance regional security. And we can do this because we're on the ground and we know the people. So we're able to make the connections, and we take demand signals from both sides, from both the US side, or the Thai side, or the Australian side, or the Filipino side, or the Nepalese side, and we try to match up those demand signals, whether it's a vet SME they want, or some other type of inbound expertise like dental, and we will then make those phone calls and make those arrangements. So again, we have those folks on WhatsApp, and for those Line, which is a little bit inferior to WhatsApp, we can just easily text with the Surgeon Generals, etc. Next slide, please. And sort of just, this is a real world example, so I'm sure many of you heard about this in the news, of what this looks like in action. Now, obviously, this isn't a normal day. I'm talking about the earthquake, but it does speak to what it means to be on the ground. And so you can see little old AFRIMS there. That's that green building, and the arrows pointing directly towards our parking lot. And then next door is the flagship Royal Thai Army Military Hospital. And when the quake hit, we at AFRIMS, we evacuated our team, and we entered into that parking lot in front of our building. And then we saw what was happening next door. So next slide, please. So PMK Hospital, they suffered some structural instability, and the people in charge made the decision to evacuate the entire facility, and that meant the ICU and patients, mid-surgery. And those patients came flooding out into the street and into our parking lot. So you can see all those ICU patients. Those are not soldiers. Those are elderly people with terminal illnesses, etc. And they were wheeled into our parking lot, about 100 people. And so our team, specifically our military team, really immediately helped set up a temporary triage site and really jumped into action and met the need. Not so much, some medical support, but really just logistics and coordination and doing the things that soldiers know how to do, and muscle, right? Carrying things from side to side, setting up fans, bringing in water. And we did that side by side with our Royal Thai Army partners. So again, not a typical day, but this is really, what presence and partnership looks like. You can be there on the spot. You see good days and bad days, but it's really one of the huge advantages of an overseas lab and a permanent presence. And this is why AFRIMS matters. It's the R&D, but it's also the partnerships and the connections that we make. So at this point, I will hand it off to my esteemed colleague, Lieutenant Colonel Erin, who will talk a little bit more about how we operationalize our GHE here at AFRIMS. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir. Next slide, please. So Colonel Levine took a kind of a high-level strategic view, and I'm going to give you some specific examples. Basically, the majority of emerging infectious diseases and all known epidemics and pandemics in our lifetimes have been zoonotic in nature, which means they came from animals and into people via spillover from usually wildlife into naive human populations at the human-animal interface in a conducive environment. So this is why discussion of global health engagement activities inevitably touches on the One Health concept, which basically just refers to the fact that an approach with coordinated efforts from human and animal health, as well as the environmental sector, is really critical for the prevention and early detection of emerging zoonotic diseases so that containment and control strategies can be implemented. In Southeast Asia specifically, the relative risk of zoonotic infectious disease emergence is heightened, and that's for several environmental, socioeconomic, and cultural factors kind of pictured here. So in the top left there, the pre-existing wet tropical environment is already very conducive to vectors like mosquitoes and ticks that spread many of the diseases that are endemic here. That in combination with climate change, which leads to more extreme weather events and to the natural disasters such as the earthquake that Colonel Levine just mentioned, but also monsoons, stuff like that, can cause collapse of public and animal health infrastructures, lead to more breeding of mosquitoes, et cetera. So all of that contributes to the zoonotic disease emergence. Additionally, the bottom left picture there indicates changing land use patterns and the frequent encroachment of human into wildlife habitats that can lead to increased human and animal interactions, as well as decreased biodiversity. Dense populations and large movements of people, whether that's refugees or migrant workers or just general urbanization, is often seen in combination with poor public or animal health infrastructure. And then, of course, cultural practices. So the bottom right picture there is a backyard farm in Vietnam, which is very common here, where domestic species like swine, waterfowl, avian species, and then people live in close physical contact, maybe with limited veterinary care or knowledge of biosecurity. The wet markets or live animal markets have many species crammed together, from crustaceans to poultry to waterfowl to wildlife, maybe even non-human primates, maybe bats. So that's really a prime ground for zoonotic disease transmission. This is also a big area for the illegal wildlife trade. So those situations where we have multiple species housed in crowded and stressful, unnatural conditions can lead to increased pathogen shedding. So all of these factors can just lead to an increased risk or a perfect storm for various zoonotic disease emergence. Next slide, please. So in that framework, global health is important because it's a unifying concept, it's non-kinetic, it's politically non-threatening, and we all know that a healthy world is a more stable world. So DoD, like R&D institutes like AFRIMS, like Colonel Levine mentioned, we're very effective, far forward medical diplomacy platforms and powerful tools in the global health security arena, and strategically important for the DoD as well. AFRIMS does a lot of global health engagement work. Every day we do just job training and continuing education for our Thai work staff, but we also have more targeted approaches. So on the left here, we have some images from our entomology department, and they do educational outreach at primary schools around Thailand, teaching them about the life cycles of mosquitoes and ticks, vector-borne disease, transmission, how to prevent tick-borne disease, how to avoid tick habitats, how to eliminate mosquito breeding sites, et cetera. And then those kids bring that knowledge home and increase awareness in general about vector-borne diseases. This also demystifies what AFRIMS does, and it helps the communities in general reduce the risk of vector-borne diseases. Additionally, all of the different science departments at AFRIMS have various internship programs. For example, our veterinary medicine department has veterinary technician and veterinary student interns. And then the whole of AFRIMS has an annual externship program where Royal Thai Army AFRIMS personnel rotate through our science department. So that top right picture is showing a Royal Thai Army extern learning about histopathology processing in our comparative pathology laboratory. And then finally, the bottom right image there is the Lao People's Democratic Republic. Our bacterial and parasitic diseases department has a collaboration with them to do surveillance for antimicrobial resistance and anti-malarial resistance. And as part of that scientific collaboration, there is also some training that was provided on some of the laboratory techniques that are necessary, such as PCR. So a lot of technical training and capacity building is performed as well. We have subject matter experts in just about every aspect of research science and different technical assays, which kind of leads me to my next subject and one of the major takeaways from this talk. If we want to have impactful, effective global health engagement activities, we really have to approach these activities in a really deliberate and sustainable manner. Next slide, please. So to that end, WRAIR-AFRIMS has developed this research and development, infectious disease research and development playbook, which is a standardized engagement package. If you read any of the articles that went along with the flyer, Colonel Levine authored one of them that talked about this concept. But this playbook is basically a comprehensive guide that maps our One Health and infectious disease engagements. It includes an engagement strategy, an assessment tool, and training modules. And the idea is to use a longitudinal approach where each engagement builds on previous engagements, using sort of the crawl, walk, run, or beginner, intermediate, advanced concepts of training modules. And the picture on the right shows the bottom right is sort of the assessment tool, which has a long acronym, but it's basically a way of assessing an infectious disease surveillance program or a research program, the different aspects of it, whereas red is not doing well score-wise and green is where you want to get. So the goal is to use these repeated training events longitudinally to get from red to green. So we have a menu basically that we can give our partners where they can, tell us what their goals are. We can use the assessment that I just mentioned and then discussion to figure out at a customizable, modifiable training menu basically for each specific engagement. So for example, one example of an advanced type engagement, and I don't know if Lieutenant Colonel Erin Farmer's on this line. I think I saw him on the RSVP. I love to call him out, but when he was here at AFRIMS, he led a program in Bhutan where they helped to implement some next generation sequencing and bioinformatics pipelines in Bhutan, which would be an example of one of the advanced type modules. So if we go to the next slide, I have an example of one of the deployments of this playbook concept. So in March of 2023, we, with our friends in the Philippines, executed the first ever subject matter expert exchange with the Armed Forces Philippines Veterinary Corps. This was at Camp Luna at the Armed Forces Philippines base in Quezon City in the Philippines, and it was a 3-day course. And it consisted of a combination of didactic lectures, practical exercises, field training, roundtable discussions. And I should have mentioned that on the previous slide. We make a really big effort with this playbook that is not death by PowerPoint. It's inevitable there's some lectures, especially at the beginning side of things, but people learn better by doing. So we try to incorporate a lot of field work, hands-on, case discussions, anything to keep it just people sitting there falling asleep during a lecture. And this was no exception. So for this particular subject matter expert exchange, or SME, our general topics included emerging infectious diseases, One Health zoonotic disease surveillance mechanisms, vector trapping and identification, and veterinary roles in biomedical research. I don't have time to go into all the different topics, but one of the topics I'd like to highlight was a mosquito surveillance field exercise that our entomology department put together. And for that, the students practice assembling a couple different types of mosquito traps in the classroom. And then we discussed where they should be deployed around the base to collect the most mosquitoes and at what time of day. And then the students went out into the field and placed the traps. We picked them up 12 to 24 hours later and then used the mosquitoes caught in those traps, as shown in that top middle picture there, to sort and identify different sexes, because important to know only female mosquitoes bite and suck blood from people, and different species, which is important from a disease transmission standpoint. So this was very well received. That picture in the top right is Brigadier General Navarro, the Armed Forces Surgeon General that Colonel Levine mentioned before, giving our department chief in veterinary medicine, Lieutenant Colonel Rick Kelly, a plaque. So this was the result from this SME, was that it was really well received. We did course AARs at the end, which are after action reports, and Brigadier General Navarro and the Public Health Service Center commander, as well as the Veterinary Corps chief, expressed desire to potentially include this as an annual training, a regular annual training event in their program. And then during the roundtable discussions with the students and the leaders, we identified training gaps in entomology and zoonotic disease surveillance and basic laboratory assays. There are also limited laboratory facilities and equipment available. This is important because unlike the US military, which has separate entomologists and veterinary corps officers, in the Armed Forces Philippines, veterinary corps officers are also tasked with an entomology duties of trapping mosquitoes and dealing with pest management. So these roundtable discussions revealed the gap that while they're tasked to do that job, they aren't given really the tools needed to do so. So this part of the training was really well received, and they really enjoyed it. So we decided that the way forward in the short term was to do further training sort of in the entomology, vector-borne disease surveillance realm, because this doesn't require a large laboratory footprint and it's relatively inexpensive to get started. We were planning a second subject matter expert exchange with a larger audience, and it was going to also include additional military officers from public health, medical physicians, as well as potentially nurses, but it fell through due to funding issues. However, we were able to build on what we did in 2023 and 2024 as our entomology department was conducting routine surveillance in the Philippines in support of Bala Katan, which is a military exercise that's going on right now. They invited the local veterinary corps officers in the Manila area to join them for this routine surveillance. So the mosquito part of the surveillance, they were able to review what they learned at the SME and then learn some new field concepts and practice some field techniques for mosquito trapping and identification. And then they also learned some brand new techniques with rodent trapping and field necropsy in support of leptospirosis surveillance. And leptospirosis is a really big problem in the Philippines. And those are the images showed there on the right, was this latest sort of mini SME, I guess, that we conducted in 2024. Next slide. So this last slide, I'm not going to brief the whole thing. It's just meant to guide our discussion. I just want to touch on a couple of things. If you hit, yeah, I think that's it. So these are sort of my ideas and hopefully maybe Colonel Levine's as well as good discussion points, best practices and challenges as well. Obviously funding always goes first. One thing I want to point out that can be an issue is the idea of the prevention paradox. So this is sort of the idea that, you know, we all know that money comes from, in the end, politicians. And preventing pathogen spillover is kind of considered politically invisible, because if we do our jobs while working together and there's no pandemic, it's kind of hard to say, yay, we did our jobs, there's no pandemic, because it's really easy to say, yeah, there wasn't going to be one. It's hard to prove a negative. But it's very easy to say there was a pandemic, but we handed out, you know, X thousand vaccines, and then take a picture with 100 kids who received these vaccines. And that looks beautiful, you know, on the cover of a magazine. So that can make it really difficult. But we all learned from COVID that prevention is probably better and definitely more economically feasible than reacting to and treating and dealing with a pandemic once it gets out of control. So I'll leave it at that. We can discuss or have questions about funding. Colonel Levine mentioned shifting geopolitics. This is an issue and it can be difficult both in Southeast Asia and in the US. But the last two, communication and cooperation and continuity and sustainment, are really important, especially the continuity and sustainment piece. This doesn't work if you're doing onesies and twosies. If you go once and you never go back somewhere, having continuity and sustainment builds trust. It's critical to have trust. If you don't have it, this doesn't work. You have to have a sustainment plan, and that requires the funding on our side, but it also requires buy-in and funding and ownership from the partner nation side as well. Almost all of our funding sources require some sort of a sustainment plan once the funding, whether it's 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, runs out. Community engagement is really, really important too, and sometimes seems like it's forgotten about. This has been very successful with several of our different projects at AFRIMS, where the people are very proud to have participated, whether it's cohorts in clinical trials or people who are helping provide samples for surveillance, but they're very proud to have participated and asking when we're going to have more projects. But just seeing what the community needs, talking to them, finding out their gaps, sharing the data that you've collected from them once you have it and in a way they can understand, that goes so much farther than anybody ever really thinks about. And then the communication and cooperation piece, I'll end by saying Colonel Levine mentioned the importance of us nesting with the combatant command, the Indo-PACOM, which is our combatant command in this region. That also applies to the interagency cooperation. So there's a lot of different groups operating in this area, and it can get confusing. We want to avoid duplication of effort and waste of money, especially nowadays. The Bangkok Health Policy Working Group is through the U.S. Bangkok Embassy, and it includes the groups that are kind of shown there on the right, or it used to. So that was one way that we tried to figure out who was doing what and make sure that we complemented rather than duplicated effort. But we also have to think about academia and non-governmental organizations that are all kind of working to try to do the same thing. And it's very difficult to avoid duplicating effort. And I've always said and thought that there needs to be some kind of a hub where we can see what everybody's doing and work together to complement one another. That's sort of my soapbox, so I'll stop there. And then I guess maybe Dr. Wilson, we can move to discussion now or questions. That's all I have. Unless Colonel Levine, do you want to add something to this?
No, thanks. We'll go to any questions. I saw some in the chat, but I'll let others drive that process. Thanks.
Okay, great. Well, that was a great presentation, and actually I have tons of questions, and I'm sure the audience does too. And I would love to, if we have time, talk a little bit about the playbooks, and because I think that there's a lot to be kind of gained there. So I see people raising their hands. If you're raising your hands, you need please post your question in the chat. And I think that what I'd like to start off with is, I think when you do research and partnership and research, I think there's some lessons learned that can actually be applied to doing partnership in the delivery of healthcare as part of our expeditionary force too, because I think at the end of the day, it ends up being a tactical level engagement, working with people, collecting samples, and actually doing things with your hands to collect the data and do the research and collaborate to interpret it. So one partnership I didn't see on your list was the state partnership program. And I know Washington State is the state partnership for Thailand and Malaysia. Oregon is for Vietnam. Idaho is for Cambodia. Hawaii is for Indonesia. Montana is for Sri Lanka. Can you talk a little bit about your interaction with the state partnership program?
Yeah, I would say it hasn't been enough. The most one, of course, we've done some with Washington State, and they came out here for a moment. I think it was a year ago. We met up, we talked about possibilities, but it is difficult. I mean, we're kind of niche. That's one of the things. Depending on what you want to do. So a lot of times we'll be asked to support, and I think that's what happened with that. They wanted maybe to use our vets in some type of engagement, some type of SME. But again, we have full-time jobs. So sometimes, yeah, we do have a lot of experts, but they're 06 colonels with like all these degrees. So they can't really, I don't feel right sending them out, let's say, to, work on spay neuter things of that nature for a week at a time. So I think that's what happened with that one, and that's not really a good news story, I guess. But yeah, I wish there was more, but there hasn't been as much as one would think. That's I don't know.
Okay.
Technical Ball, did you have?
Yeah, I can add a couple things. I know that we've worked with like CREED a little bit and STRIDES, a couple of the acronyms I know with various universities and states where we were applying, or they were applying for really large grants that were too small of a fish to go after ourselves, but we were going to be a hub in their spoke of the plan and help with on the ground laboratory support, on the ground training and that sort of thing. To my knowledge, I don't believe we were successful at either one of the grants that we applied for that way, but that was one of the methods of trying to get new types of funding that we were working on, and we still have our fingers crossed that it might work one of these days. We've also talked and worked a little bit with MOHIP, which is out of Michigan State. They're the Mekong region, One Health. So they do webinars, but they also have some scholarships and stuff. So I know that our entomology department chief spoke at one of their conferences about AFRIMS work. And then we've talked with them a little bit and when they came through the embassy, but like Colonel Levine said, we haven't actually been successful at getting funding or putting anything together. We also had, we were going to be a fellowship site for the Southeast Asia One Health University Network program, but that was funded by USAID. So right when I got in the door to do that, it went away. So sometimes the current situation puts a little wrench in things too. Over.
Okay. No, I think that's always, I think, especially, I mean, there's always more work than people, and I think the ability to kind of collaborate and leverage each other's expertise is helpful, but we still kind of, that sometimes has to be prioritized. So there's a couple of questions from Admiral Cullison that I want to get to in just a second, but first, I'd like to ask a question that Major Pecha asked, and it looks like they're from the 95th CA, which, you know, is focused on engagement. And I think their question is kind of part of this, which is like the integration of information between the research kind of enterprise and the kind of force employer kind of tactical level engagement side. Major Pecha asked specifically about, you know, a primary communication platform that other military teams come into the AR can, you know, access your biosurveillance information or contribute to it outside. I have my own answer, which is our medical options platform in terms of having sharing AARs and being able to link up. But do you have any other kind of platforms, or when people are coming into your AOR to look for biosurveillance data, other than, you know, Travax and all the kind of stuff that people already know about?
I'll just take a quick shot and then I'll hand it over to Lieutenant Colonel Ball. But I would say that there's a, you know, it's not clear. You know, when we talk about gaps in the R&D space, I would say that this is one of many. But sort of how the data that we collect alongside all of the other laboratories and overseas labs in particular, you know, all of that data, how it gets to the operational forces so that they can use it, action it in a timely fashion. And so, you know, that GEIS data, we just recently met with the team ReadyNet is what it was called, and that they're supposed to be developing some really one-stop shopping, like you know, everyone wants like a heat map, like a beautiful heat map, and you can say, okay, here's where I'm going, what's out there, what should I do? But we're not there yet. And so that solution, in my humble opinion, isn't going to come from AFRIMS. That solution has to come from above us. So we're out here busily, you know, working with local hospitals, collecting samples, collecting that data. But if the intent is for groups like AFRIMS to sort of present that data, then we need new capabilities, because currently we just don't have that expertise. We don't have those kind of skill sets. And so that data, let's say biosurveillance, would move to GEIS. And so I know they're working on a better solution. You know, there's spot reports that we produce. Like if we see something really that we feel needs to be actioned immediately, we produce a spot report. But that's essentially like, you know, a one pager. It's not super high tech. And does that make it to the person who's going out into the field 2 weeks from now? That's not clear. When we do exercise support, again, because we have to separate the research from the clinical, you know, we can give them information in aggregate in real time, but we can't say like, you know, Private Snuffy over here just got diagnosed with COVID and or what have you. But we can say, you know, 10% of the samples we took were positive for X. Over.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, sir. I was just going to say
some of that's. Go ahead.
Sorry. In addition to ReadyNet, I was going to add the WRBU, the Walter Reed Biosystemics Unit, has another one called Vector Map. That one is up and running, and that gives kind of like what we would like to see for almost everything, basically like a map that you can click on, and it shows vector biosurveillance data from not just here, but all over the world. I would love to see that for everything. We're kind of a little bit hamstrung partially by human data and all of the, you know, rules that go along with that. And also by just the, you know, the IT situation in the DoD. We can't easily, you know, manage data, and we struggle with that. And that's something we're currently struggling with. But yeah, I see that Major Witten put something in the chat that we do produce a monthly GEIS surveillance report and we do share it with stakeholders, and then GEIS does their thing with it as well. And, you know, through the military, the COCOM and people who are doing work in this region, military-wise, can access that data as well. But I do agree that it would be nice if it was easier to access, and I think that is being worked on. Over.
Okay, I mean, that's great. I think some of that also speaks to the speed of research versus maybe the speed of, you know, operational understanding of the environment. Let me flip this around a little bit, which is, you know, if teams are out there like security force assistance teams or CA teams are out there and they see something and they want to report that to you or get that to you, is there a method that you guys prefer that, or should they email it to that S3 email that was just put in the chat? Or is there things that you would like to know from other military units that are out in your environment, almost as sensors, that if they see something or they make a relationship or something that they wanted to pass on to you, is that something you'd be interested in? How would you want to know about it?
That's a good question, and I don't know
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
not sort of the standard way that our privacy units would work. I mean, because they would they would have 6 soldiers. We're not sort of like quickly expeditionary like that. Like we wouldn't jump on. I mean, if there was a major outbreak nearby, we could probably react to that, but we're not really designed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we go to the field occasionally for these exercises, but those are pre-planned events, and so that feels more like a clinical response, I think. And then whatever came out of that clinical response, if there was something interesting, that may lead to a project.
Understood. And maybe they don't want you to do anything. They just want to make sure that you're aware of it. Should they just email you to that email, or, I mean, or they just want to reach out to you? Is that
Absolutely
the best email?
Anyone is welcome to reach out directly to us if they see something, and we would assess that situation and react to it appropriately.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to go to Admiral Cullison's question, which is, you know, if you had to describe the kind of interagency academia collaboration that you think would optimize everything in an ideal world, what would that look like? And have the recent cuts affected you over at AFRIMS and your kind of throughput, or are you expecting firings or changes to your previous operations?
Yeah, I'm not going to go too much into, let's see, the funding. I mean, to date, not so much, but we see it coming. We're funded, for those who don't know, we don't really receive core funding. We are funded, that we compete for grants and awards and such, like academia. And we expect some of that funding to continue as is, like GEIS, but we expect other sources like MIDRIP maybe to be cut into. And that will absolutely impact our ability to do this work. We know, though, that our leadership at WRAIR and MRDC support the work we do and recognize the value of the overseas laboratories. And so I know that immense efforts being put onto ensuring that, for lack of a better term, we keep the lights on, that our capabilities don't go away, because like things like our vivarium, as an example, you would think maybe that it was core funded, that, every year we received X amount of dollars because it costs that much to keep the monkeys happy, but that's not the way it works. We basically use overhead dollars, science dollars, to do that. So if our science dollars were to drop off, that would be bad for those capabilities. And again, MRDC and WRAIR are very aware of that and are doing everything in their power to ensure that our unique capabilities remain. Over.
And with regards to the ideal working together in a beautiful world, I don't know. I haven't really ever thought about what I would like in a perfect world it would look like, but I think that I've been preaching about for the whole time I've been here. I think there should be some sort of a hub, like maybe regional, and each of the, like for Southeast Asia. And it seems like each entity or organization has its own, like, One Health or Southeast Asia region or whatever, or GHE person, but none of them necessarily talk to all the other ones for all the other agencies. And then if we're talking about governmental versus academia versus, so I think some sort of a hub or a website or, you know, similar to what we do with the health policy working group at the embassy, where we could see who's proposing what, who wants to do what, and how to work together at doing that versus everybody doing it stovetyped and separately would be the best way forward. But that's a big ask and a lot of work, and who's going to be the one in charge of that, you know, website or meeting or whatever. Especially now that everybody's losing people, because originally I used to try to tell the State Department they should do it, since, you know, everybody goes through them for visas and permission to come into the country, and they sort of see what's going on. But they're losing people. You know, CDC is losing people. USAID's gone. So I think that I still would like to see some sort of hub like that, but it's hard to figure out like how it's going to really happen, you know, feasibly. You know, everything takes money. But I think that it would make things run more effectively, and there would be less waste, and it would really eliminate a lot of duplication of effort. So.
Okay. Well, thank you for those ideas. I'd like to kind of finish off talking about the playbooks, and thank you very much for sending the read ahead on the article that you wrote in 2018 and the example of the playbooks. And you know, there was a whole effort that was being kind of quarterbacked out of our center about other playbooks that we've done other playbooks in other areas of different kind of levels of completion. A lot of that was overcome by events when COVID happened, and those kind of had to be set aside. And so thank you for your example, and we really do want to hear from the community at large and Indo-PACOM about the value of having those type of playbooks. Can you guys just kind of summarize it? And I'm really excited that you guys continue to kind of put your actions where your mouth was, Colonel Levine, in terms of what was needed and develop it in the research space. And what was kind of the biggest take home that you guys have learned from the value of those playbooks?
Well, you know, the playbooks really, you know, when we started to work on those previously, they were intended for sort of the classic 40-hour SME, right? You get on an airplane, you'd go somewhere. And for those who are interested in GHE, that's a great way to sort of jump into it. Hopefully you get tasked to go on one of those things, and you go on a mil SME, let's say. And you know, the point was, it felt like when I was doing those, I guess 10 years ago, like we would literally sit down and you'd make your own PowerPoints and you'd reinvent the wheel, and you'd write your friends and try to get pictures, but you realize that this had already been probably done 10 times, and what a waste of resources that was. And then, you know, you'd show up at that location and you maybe thought you were about to brief a bunch of technicians, but then it turned out they were all doctors, or the opposite, and all your material would instantly be sort of like too high end or too basic. And so those things, the intent here was to create a system, a process by which a young captain would get tagged, and they had a resource that they could rely on, and a process by which they could work through. And then they can then focus on sort of the other things, like having the right material, thinking of hands-on activities, and really put their mind into the more worthwhile value-added things, as opposed to just, you know, building PowerPoints, right? Because 40 hours of PowerPoints, that's a lot of content. And I remember kind of doing that and realizing that was insane. That said, the 40-hour SME, we do those here at AFRIMS, and we do those really as sort of an icebreaker. Like, let's say there's a country that we want to do R&D in, we might use a 40-hour SME to get into a military, to make those contacts and to really talk about what we do. And so we use them as a tool, and there's different ways to use them, of course. But then aside from that, I think that's really what makes AFRIMS unique, is we just have a lot of day-to-day. And so the playbook doesn't make as much sense for that, right? So the day-to-day interactions, we decided we would set up externships and internships and things like that, because, you know, it's not a 40-hour event. It's not sort of a pre-programmed package. So I do think that the playbooks play an important role for our junior officers. And so the idea was that there would be one of these for every specialty. Like, you know, within the veterinary services, we developed a couple, one being military working dog engagements, one being food protection engagements. When I got to WRAIR-AFRIMS, I realized we could do something similar. And of course, Lieutenant Colonel Erin took the lead, and she developed this playbook. And so it's a tool that we can use to approach countries. Like, for instance, if we wanted to do work in Indonesia, which came up recently, that's the kind of thing we might offer up front. And then as we went there and we saw their laboratories and we saw their capabilities, we could use that as a friendly knock on the door that we funded ourselves, then maybe expand that into actual grant money and GEIS work and things like that. So every unit out there would maybe use these things in a different way, but they can serve all kinds of roles. But unfortunately, as you mentioned, Dr. Wilson, the playbooks really never came. So again, we're right back to having to create them at, like someone who's just super interested in this thing and has spare time. And so that's a hard ask. Over.
And I'll add
well,
that,
thanks for sharing. Go ahead, Erin.
sorry, really quickly, that they're a little different here. Like some of the veterinary medicine, military working dog ones that Colonel Levine mentioned. Here at AFRIMS and working in Southeast Asia, I think I'd have to say they're more modifiable and more flexible because every country is different. Everything is, you just have to be a lot more flexible here. Things change. That would be my lessons learned from them. You get where you're going and things change. There's a holiday you didn't know about, or different people attend than what you thought, or that kind of thing. So you definitely have to be very flexible about what you're going to teach, the schedule, all that kind of thing. So these definitely have to be very customizable, and we keep it that way, and it works the best that way. Over.
All right. Well, thank you. I think we're going to have to end it there. Thank you very much for your time. I think there's a lot of key things here, I think, that we've talked about, some of which, like the prevention, difficult to show prevention is tough. And I think some of that is we need to make sure that we baseline before our intervention so that we can at least try to demonstrate a decrease in things. And then what I really like about the playbook, the way that you've kind of described it, is especially when you go to a partner with a different level of sustainability or technology, whether the focus is on capacity building or interoperability may really depend upon, the partner's level of technology. And I recently visited Vietnam, and I thought it was fascinating how, the country changed as I went from the north to the south in terms of, the level of technology and development. So I think we just have to be prepared for, working with partners at different levels of capabilities. So, all right, I think at that, I think we will, I would do encourage everybody, we do have the master class that was recorded about AFRIMS, and then we will stay on the line afterwards if people want to ask some questions. Colonel Ball has agreed to stay a little bit later to answer specific questions. And, Colonel Erickson, you have your hands up, so.
Hey, I just wanted to say thanks so much for staying up late, both Matt and Erin. We really appreciate that, and your teammates too. I'm sure you've got a few folks on. Really appreciate all the great work that you're doing, and really just WRAIR-AFRIMS is truly a strategic asset for the DoD and the U.S. government. Similarly to Ramey, I could show a picture from about 2011-12 timeframe when I first went there, actually with bringing a group from Lao PDR. So I'm really excited to see that continued partnership on surveillance, thinking back to, 12, 13, 14 years ago. Just thanks much from CGHE and kind of the broader community, and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, we're going to turn it over to Maria, who has some last-minute announcements, and thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you, Colonel Levine, Lieutenant Colonel Ball, and Dr. Wilson for such an insightful discussion. Now we'll highlight some key resources for those interested in learning more. Linked here and in the chat, you'll find publications, including articles from Military Review and Military Medicine, as well as DoD GHE Snapshot issues 14 and 15, providing insights from USU's Operation Bushmaster and Pacific Angel. Additionally, you can access peers' recordings and other products on our CGHE YouTube playlist. Next, here are some of our upcoming events. If you're interested in taking a Foggy course, a virtual iteration will be held from May 19th to the 23rd, and you can apply by scanning the QR code or clicking the link in the chat. Also, mark your calendars for the GHAWK taking place from June 23rd to the 27th in Bethesda, Maryland. And finally, don't forget to stay tuned for Peers number 9 on June 11th. Now moving on to important updates, starting with the medical options survey. If you've used the medical options platform, we'd greatly appreciate your feedback through the user survey. Your input is valuable for improving the platform, and you can access the survey via the link in the chat. Please note that the survey is behind a CAC firewall. Additionally, if you're not familiar with medical options, you can join one of our virtual information sessions this April, and please be sure to register using the link in the chat or by scanning the QR code on the screen. And finally, please be aware that MillSuite is sunsetting on April 30th. We're working on a new forum space, so in the meantime, please subscribe to our mailing list to stay informed about news and updates. We encourage you to take action and get involved, so please share your feedback on today's peers meeting by completing a quick survey. Also, if you have a GHE topic you'd like to share, please consider hosting a peers webinar with us. And if you are interested, please reach out to us at cghe.usuhs.edu. And most importantly, subscribe to our mailing list to receive our news, announcements, and the latest GHE knowledge products by reaching out to that same email. To conclude, here are several ways to stay connected with us. You can always reach us via email, connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and X, formerly Twitter. And as mentioned, don't forget to check out our CGHE playlist on YouTube. This brings us to the end of today's session. We truly appreciate your participation today. We hope the information shared has been valuable and provided clear ways for you to stay connected and involved with us. So pending any questions you may have, that's all we have for today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much.